This meeting is recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube. Just a FYI. Hello everyone, welcome to another Open Cluster Management Community Meetings. Today is February 23rd, 2023, and we're lucky to have Andy here to talk about KCP Edge. Andy, without any further delay, please take it away. Thank you. It seems like you're muted. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I guess Andy is just having some audio problem. We'll wait for a bit for him to.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Oh, sorry about that. Yep, Zoom was having an issue. All right, would you like me to go first? Is that why you're calling on me?
Yep,
Okay,
please go ahead.
great. Hi, everybody. I'm Andy Anderson, and I have Paolo Dettori on the phone with me, on the WebEx with me. We're here to talk to you a little bit today about KCP Edge and what we've been doing in that project. So I'd like to get started here. See if I can share with you what we've got going on. So we are IBM researchers, and that's who we work for, IBM. And we've been partnering with several different organizations, both inside and outside of IBM, working on developing use cases for why the current state of affairs in Kubernetes, in KCP, in OCM, and ACM is not sufficient enough for the edge distributed locations that we would like to manage for our customers in industry, in terms of manufacturing, partners like Ford and Toyota, agriculture. We've been working with the university or Cornell University on developing some use cases around how they will advance technology in farming and in cattle and other commodities. And so the use of edge technology there is important. And we're also doing this in telco. We've had numerous reminders of use cases that exist in telco today and other places as well. So the use cases that have arisen have been largely related to the use of edge devices or edge locations, we should call them. So let's talk about what an edge location is for just a second. So an edge location in our definition is anything that speaks kube. So it speaks the kube API. It consumes desired state and it gives up status. And so to do this at scale, let's say 1 million or more of these edge locations becomes problematic in a number of ways. First of all, in the way of managing the deployment of workloads across those environments, if you were to have to manually manufacture the deployments or the declarative definition for each one of those individual edge locations and multiply that by any number greater than a few, you start to get into a lot of manual work. Also, the ability to place that workload on individual edge locations at your own desire, not at the desire of the scheduler. So we find many times, like in the case of KCP's TMC, that there is a distribution model in place of it assumes one to any of an edge location instead of one to many. And we take the viewpoint that one to many would be more attractive to most, and then allow for predicates and other filters to determine to further customize the placement of those workloads. And of course, that's on the downward trajectory, right? Sending workload to an edge location. But there's also the matter of surfacing the status of an edge location in the northbound sense. right? What does it take to get status for individual edge locations up to 1 million? Well, that would be a lot for someone A to read through, and B for the system itself to consume on somewhat a regular basis. You can imagine if there's a flood or a storm of status changes based on maybe, let's say, disconnection of an edge location, that would be rather harmful to the system and create something similar to a denial of a service attack. And so the idea of summarizing those statuses in the northbound direction is new and novel for this area of investigation we have for KCP Edge. And all this also combats not only scale, but also the idea of disconnected operations. So we find many times is these edge locations do not have either regular internet connectivity, it's flaky at best, or potentially they could have very good connectivity, but for us to be tolerant of that, the amount of time that a specific edge location is disconnected is important to us in our use case. So that's the rough outline of what KCP Edge does and is focused on. It's consistent interfaces, APIs, it's heterogeneous coverage of edge locations, and its scalability, all for configuration management for edge devices or edge locations, I should say. So that's the basic gist of KCP Edge. Any questions on that so far? Okay. So now I think there was a question that Mike had brought up is like, well, how is this different than OCM? And for that specific discussion, I brought Paolo along with me so he could he has more experience in the OCM space, and maybe Paolo could give us a few pointers as to what we're doing in KCP Edge is different than OCM. Paolo?
Yes, thank you, Andy. So, well, first of all, maybe I can start talking about why we decide to start with KCP as kind of as a foundation for our exploration. The first aspect, I think, is we sort of found interesting, useful, this concept of workspace in KCP that allows somehow to give you this kind of small footprint virtual API server that is possibly allowing to have, to some extent, what we call denaturated resources within. So the fact that basically you have this environment where you can, for example, create CRDs, or you can create workload objects and so on. And this provide basically this kind of environment to a developer that looks like a Kubernetes cluster, but somehow behind the scene we can change the behavior, because we can create controllers that somehow will react in the way that we want to these objects that are created, applied by the developer. And so basically the idea was, can we sort of have an experience that looks like similar to what you can do today with a regular Kubernetes cluster? So I don't have really to sort of wrap things in a manifest, but I can just apply, for example, a deployment, a config map, a secret, or other elements that are part of my workload, and somehow transparently be able to, based on policy, other things, deliver this to a set of targets. As Andy said, currently KCP is focused on TNC, the transparent multi-cluster, that is really this one-to-any, while we're focusing on one-to-many, but we like to achieve a similar experience of, to the one of TNC, or to the one of one-to-any, be able to do this to one-to-many. So I think that was probably one of the things that we found mostly interesting, this idea of this container. It doesn't probably apply to everything. Of course, there may be still type of resources that could potentially affect the API server behavior, like RBAC, other things. So we are also exploring how we can sort of deal with those that are not what we call denaturated resources. But overall, the idea is really to have this sort of container that allow to basically propagate workloads to the managed clusters at the edge. So that was one aspect. The other aspect I think we found interesting was this aspect of sharding. The fact that the KCP community has been looking into somehow sharding for basically reaching scale. So we wanted to see how much we really can push the scale. Of course, in Edge, scale is probably one of the main drivers of the architecture that you need to build. And that, of course, is influencing a lot of the architectural design decisions. As Andy said, one of the aspects, for example, in Edge is this idea of summarization. When you have really a very large number of clusters, you don't want to go and look for each one of them. But in this particular case, we're really looking how much we can push scale with this kind of technology. We can sort of have a native way to create shards and to scale. That is probably something we found also useful, and we've been exploring also different ways to reach scale. In addition to sharding, also we've done some exploration on using different type of database backend. There was in particular work that was done on CRDB, CockroachDB as a backend, again to be able to reach scale. And of course, another alternative is something like Kine, right? That of course you can use also with a regular Kubernetes API server, but also in this context, we found it interesting that we could have potentially a common database backend and potentially multiple shards of API server that are talking to that backend to somehow reach scale. So that was, in a way, the second motivation that we've been exploring. The third one is this idea that we somehow want to be able to have this kind of modularity approach, where we're really focusing on this feature of essentially what Andy was mentioning, the ability to sort of distribute configuration. I think we're really looking more than just trying to divide between workload and policy, more to look at generic kind of configuration objects, right? Because if you think about it, workload or policy are also YAML templates. So you can, in a way, at the base, treat them in the same way, right? So you say, well, I can think to have this kind of foundation that allow us to deliver this configuration at scale to multiple location. As Andy was saying, we want to be able to summarize, etc. But the idea is also to make sure that because of modularity, we want to be able to integrate and play well with the existing CNCF projects in the community. And that's part also some collaboration and discussion we've been having also with projects like Iverno, for example, and others. So the idea is, because if we provide this kind of transparent approach where we provide this virtual environment, this kind of virtual API server that in a way models a fleet of clusters, right? And it looks like a Kubernetes cluster. The idea is you could use tools that today you use with your regular single Kubernetes cluster, like for example, Kyverno Policy Manager and so on. Or I don't know, Argo CD or other tools that Flux and so on that you use today. And the idea is to make this process very transparent, right? I don't have to hopefully do special things except maybe defining some policy for placement. And maybe customization is also part possibly of the solution. But I don't really have to I mean, I don't have to really build other specialized things. The idea is really to reuse a lot of what exists today in CNCF and make this really, really transparent. So making this process of going from the somehow single cluster to the clusters at scale at Edge should be something that we want to really be completely smooth and transparent. That's really the motivation for us to explore so far KCP as a solution. Now, having said that, I don't think, even if there is certainly some overlap with what OCM does, right? I mean, of course, participating in OCM, well, even before its genesis as an open source when we started the work long time ago. So I'm familiar at least with the initial architecture and design of OCM. So I think there is certainly some commonalities, some common goals, but ideally, I think there could be potentially some area where both projects can benefit from each other, right? For example, OCM certainly has solved very interesting problems like the registration of cluster inventory, to some extent management of cluster life cycle, right? These are all things that we haven't been looking into, right? We've been more focusing in KCP Edge so far on the somehow configuration management aspect, not really anything about cluster management aspects, registration, all those things. So I think that potentially, ideally, KCP could provide maybe, or KCP Edge, some kind of foundation to provide maybe that kind of smooth experience on the front end with this idea of, having this somehow workspace model, this virtual API server to provide this smooth kind of transition I was mentioning from going to the single to the multi-cluster. And maybe on the back end, you can think of all the OCM machinery, for registration of cluster, for maybe transport, and so on. And those are potentially all areas that I think would be interesting to explore, right? So I'm not necessarily saying that these two projects totally overlap, but there could be areas like what I mentioned of potential collaboration. Okay, so that was a long talk. I haven't heard any questions so far. So is there any comment, feedback, questions on what I said?
So Mike, is that delineation clear to you and the team, or to you and the community? Is anybody in the community unsure about the differences or the similarities between OCM and KCP Edge?
I think that definitely gave a good overview of some of the overlapping and some of the differences. I know QJang work in both the communities, KCP as OCM. QJang, do you have any comments? Will?
No, I think that's explained quite. That's a very clear explanation to me. So we previously did some integration between KCP and OCM. Like we previously prototyped something like running the syncer in the TMC as a add-on in the OCM. So the syncer's lifecycle is managed by the OCM. So as Paulo described, it's just like the OCM is running as a backend, and the KCP at the front end provide the transparent service. We also do some prototype, like we expose OCM service as an API export in the KCP, so we can start multiple OCM control plane on the KCP per workspace. Yeah, so I mean, these are all kind of prototype that we do some tests before. Nothing concrete, just some initial idea that we have.
Yeah, I think this aligns with the idea that there is potential for somehow for these two projects to benefit from each other potentially, right? We say, well, maybe there are areas where KCP can be somehow useful, especially in this area of maybe user experience, sort of the front end, this idea of creating this virtual environment, in a way, the workspace for each developer. That is probably an area that we think is interesting. And of course, I don't think we have yet good results on, we have done yet enough on really looking at the scalability of pushing scalability to sharding, all of the stuff. So that will be potentially another area, but at this point we don't really have good data enough to basically say, well, we can achieve good scalability today. So that's probably a much longer term exploration that I think we want to pursue, at least in the context of Edge multi-cluster for KCP.
Yes, and as a point of information to add on to what Paulo's saying is that I don't know if you remember back, any of your folks on the team is near Namen and the work that was done on Hub of Hubs. And that was kind of the motivation, is once that was discovered as to, how far could the scale be taken, that we would go back and maybe revisit it at a later time to see if we could even bring that scale to higher numbers. We have folks from, we've been starting discussions in the community with folks from Chick-fil-A. And if you're familiar with their restaurant compute platform, they've got about 2,500 restaurants at this point that are all, they're wired up with, each one of them have 3 Intel NUCs. Across those Intel NUCs, they're running a Kubernetes cluster. And they do all kinds of things, from predicting, when the lunch rush hour is going to be, to educating their associates in the store, and any number of, accounting features that need to be done at the location of the store. And their restaurants are growing at the rate of almost 10% a year. And so 200 more will be added this year. And then that, for the foreseeable future, they see that as the up, how fast they're growing. And so if you continue to, extrapolate that, they're going to get well beyond what we can do right now with just a few objects per location inside etcd. We know that that's going, that model doesn't hold up when you start deploying more and more workloads to those locations. And the idea that they're using these systems ephemerally, they're not considered to be, they're not pets, they're cattle, right? So if one should go bad in the, let's say in the cluster, they can try their best to revive it with Ansible scripts, let's just say, but they can also just refresh the cluster and redeploy the workloads. And so that seems more than likely, that reduces the amount of time and the overhead that's required for maintenance, reduces the complexity of the number of use cases they have to cover in terms of, getting those systems back online and operational. So we're starting to investigate with them. Fast food's just another example. It's one of those 4 main areas that we're investigating use cases in, and fast food seems to be leading the way. So this is, a space where we can share those use cases to see how we could use OCM or technology from KCP Edge and KCP together in the open source to try and resolve those issues or identify gaps that we can work on together, as Paulo was stating.
Yeah, by the way, I think next steps, at least for me, it would be interesting to have more discussion about, these ideas that you said you already tested some ideas how to somehow put together OCM and KCP. So I think to continue the discussion somehow, even in the community, it would be interesting to see there are other things that where these 2 projects somehow can benefit from each other. I think, for example, the idea of somehow using an API export for OCM as a service looks also very interesting. And I like to see also this from the angle of somehow how this kind of technologies could help, to solve some of these use cases, or the need maybe to build these internal developer platforms that somehow are more oriented to developers to provide this kind of smooth, seamless kind of Kubernetes interface to build this type of platform. That will be something I think interesting.
So, I think to close up here, Mike, I think we've used enough of your time. We've got to run over to another call also at the middle of the hour here. So we've got a coding milestone that we're working towards for March 30th, and we're planning on exposing what we've been able to accomplish to the out to the open source community, and we hope to do this on a quarterly basis. Some of the areas that we're investigating and working on right now have good first issues assigned to them in our queue, and they're available if you'd like to take a look at them, validate them, scrutinize them, critique them. All of the above is open and available for your viewing pleasure. So if anybody's interested in joining us, we have a meeting. Our next community meeting is actually at 10 a.m. today. I can furnish invites to people, or you can grab them via the Google Calendar that's in the main repository, and we can talk more there.
Thank you, Andy. That was a great presentation. Are there any other comments or questions for Andy and the KCP Edge folks? If not, thank you everyone for coming. Have a nice day. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.